Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a massive, silent shift that is completely restructuring the modern dating market. For decades, the rules of dating basically felt like a permanent, predictable law of nature. But recently, the foundational math of how people meet, pair up, and actually commit to each other has totally changed, and it's left millions of people feeling utterly bewildered. So we're going to look at this through the lens of behavioral economics to figure out exactly what is happening under the surface.
Okay, let's start with a number that's going to absolutely blow your mind. 63% of men under the age of 30 in the US are currently single. Now, you might have heard that number floating around before, but what is rarely talked about is how this dynamic violently flips later in life. According to Pew Research, after the age of 40, women actually become significantly more likely to be unpartnered than men. Think about that. The group of women that had practically every option in the world at age 25 suddenly becomes the group with the fewest options at 42. It's a staggering reversal. And I want to assure you right off the bat, we're analyzing this purely as an objective economic phenomenon. This isn't a culture war, it's not a finger-pointing exercise, we're just looking at the cold, hard data and the shifting market incentives.
To make sense of how we got here, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the quiet exit, the availability assumption, the market correction, and finally, a window for adaptation. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The quiet exit.
You know what's really wild is that this massive societal shift happened completely under the radar. There was no protest, no trending hashtag, no manifesto. The quiet exit isn't men throwing a tantrum, it's really just a calculated resignation. Guys are basically running a cost-benefit analysis on the dating market. They're weighing what it requires of them in effort, time, and emotional risk against the actual odds of getting a meaningful relationship out of it. And for a lot of them, that math is coming back negative. When the costs consistently outweigh the rewards, you don't get a loud protest, you just get quiet vacancy. They literally just stop showing up.
Survey data perfectly captures the psychology. The American Survey Center found that 57% of young men feel pessimistic about finding a suitable partner. Notice that specific word, right? Pessimistic. They aren't necessarily bitter or angry. Pessimism just means they've looked at the board, crunched the numbers, and concluded the math doesn't work in their favor. It's just a quiet acceptance of the odds.
And honestly, it's pretty easy to see why. According to Forbes, a near-unanimous 91% of men believe dating is harder now than it has ever been. And because of this, they aren't exactly begging to return to the table. Instead, a lot of them are finding profound peace in hobbies, friendships, and their own independence. I mean, think about it. A content person doesn't desperately seek out a frustrating market. They just stay exactly where they are.
Which brings us to Part 2, the availability assumption.
So when a huge portion of men quietly exits the market, how does the other side absorb that shock? Well, check out this staggering piece of data. 67% of women report never experiencing romantic rejection. Never. Not once. Now, this doesn't mean these women are flawlessly navigating relationships. What it actually proves is that they've operated in a historical system where men consistently approached and men completely absorbed the risk of rejection. In this traditional system, a woman's primary task was basically just focused on selection.
This dynamic exposes the danger of what we can call the availability assumption. For generations, the dating market essentially felt like gravity. Women could focus on their 20s, build a killer career, enjoy their independence, and just safely assume that whenever they were finally ready to settle down, a pool of commitment-ready men would be waiting for them to tap into. They treated a dynamic, shifting market like it was an endless natural resource.
But here's the thing. Markets are not endless. That assumption was completely shattered by a collision of specific forces. Dating apps entirely restructured who has access to whom. Economic shifts made entering a partnership feel legally and financially a lot riskier. And cultural messaging aggressively praised female independence while at the same time kind of framing male desires for a traditional partnership as a weakness. Now, impartially speaking, no one designed this system maliciously. It was just a perfect storm of aligned incentives and shifting narratives that ended up eroding the traditional dating pool.
Moving on to Part 3, the market correction.
In behavioral economics, when the breakdown of basic assumptions triggers a severe economic reality, we have a clear term for it, a market correction. When the price of something, in this case female attention and access, has been artificially inflated for too long and the supply of commitment-ready men shrinks, reality eventually forces a harsh adjustment. And corrections, they're never gentle. They are just mathematically inevitable.
You can clearly see this correction playing out in how both sides experience dating today. Guys are overwhelmingly struggling just to be seen, valued, or even given a fair chance in a hyper-competitive app landscape.
On the flip side, women are struggling to find men who actually want commitment. Now, these might feel like opposing problems, but they're really not. They are two sides of the exact same coin, creating this brutal feedback loop of total misalignment.
And the data shows this supply contraction is accelerating insanely fast. Pew Research tracked this in real time, and they found that in 2019, 61% of single men were actively looking for relationships or dates. By 2022, just 3 years later, that plummeted to 50%. That is an 11-point decline practically overnight.
Inside that rapidly shrinking pool, there's a massive commitment gap. Among the singles who are actually still participating, 41% of women are exclusively seeking a committed relationship, compared to only 25% of men. When a massive pool of women is chasing a tiny fraction of commitment-ready men, it dramatically shifts all the market leverage straight to the men who stuck around.
This creates a really brutal misalignment. A lot of women spent their 20s optimizing for the very traits they desired in a partner. Things like education, career, and status, which honestly is great, but decades of cross-cultural research, from David Buss to modern marriage market analyses, consistently show that men don't actually prioritize those traits in a partner. Men consistently select for warmth, kindness, and emotional availability. So in a way, many women essentially became the husbands they were looking for, totally unaware that the market doesn't reward those traits symmetrically.
The result here is that women are entering their 30s and negotiating from memory. They're making major dating decisions and setting really strict standards based on a dating market that simply hasn't existed for 5 to 10 years. You just can't negotiate effectively when your data is a decade out of date.
Let's wrap this up with part 4, a window for adaptation.
Here's the harsh truth. While markets can take years to balance out, human biology simply doesn't wait. The societal architecture of marriage is actively collapsing right before our eyes. Back in 1949, 79% of American households were led by married couples. Today, that number has plummeted to just 47%. And yet, research shows that over 80% of Gen Z still deeply values and desires marriage. The desire hasn't vanished at all, but the pathway to achieve it has completely broken down.
The result is a truly chilling record. Today, 25% of 40-year-olds in America have never been married. Compare that to 1980, when that number was just 6%. We are literally looking at a 4-fold increase in lifetime singlehood in just a few decades.
Part of the reason for this gridlock is a very cold, legal calculation that a lot of men are making today. They view modern marriage not as some romantic milestone, but as a legal agreement, where the person who initiates the breakup, which statistically speaking is overwhelmingly women, can access assets and future earnings. Now, whether you agree with that framing or not, impartially speaking, millions of men believe it, and it directly counters those comforting cultural narratives that everything is just going to magically work out.
But listen, a market correction doesn't mean hopelessness. It just requires adaptation. The women who are successfully finding stable partners today are the ones adjusting their strategy to the market that actually exists, not the one they were culturally promised. They're breaking the habit of negotiating from memory. They're valuing consistency and stability over pure excitement. They're recognizing male effort in forms they weren't explicitly taught to look for. And most importantly, they're treating the men in front of them as individuals rather than representatives of an entire category.
So I want to leave you with a really provocative question to think about. What are you willing to do because you care right now? We are in this incredibly brief window where both sexes are experiencing intense mutual discomfort. The absolute worst outcome is weaponizing this truth against each other. The best outcome? Using this exact moment of clarity to drop the outdated playbooks and build a brand new foundation together. The market has absolutely corrected. Now, the real question is, how are we going to respond?